Coffee. Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back to my channel. Do I have a video for you today? It is actually my third time trying to record this dang video. The first time I got most of the way through and it was like really good. And then I got a phone call asking if I wanted to go hang out. And of course I said yes, because I tried to get out of the house as often as possible. Otherwise I would never leave if I didn't go when people invited me somewhere. So thank God for that. And then on the second attempt, I got all the way through the video, but it sucked. It really sucked. I couldn't focus. This happened. What is this? So that's what we're doing today. We are going to be talking about America's first documented serial killer while I attempt to paint my nails. So it's a learning process for you. It's a learning process for me. I really suck at painting my nails. I've done this will be the third time and it's just not going well. So let's get started. I'm gonna start by removing this nasty garbage that's on my nails right now. So today, sorry, I'm angrily talking, I feel like, and moving everything really angrily because I'm frustrated. Actually, this needs more coffee. I literally made this for the first filming. I'm gonna finish her off. I mean, that was the second filming that I made. I don't know. The first one today, because this is the second one today. And then, oh yeah, this creamer is like really good. It's, I used the entire bottle. It's almond milk creamer. It's almond milk creamer and it has like coconut cream in it too. And this flavor is pecan caramel and holy shit, it's good. It's good stuff. All right. Delicious. Okay. So I'm gonna start by taking this off. I think I already said that. Anyway, let's get started. So today we are going to be talking about America's first documented serial killer, and his name was H.H. Holmes. It was actually originally Herman Webster Mudgett, which is a terrible name, and he ended up changing it later on in life. He was born in 1861 to a pretty wealthy family, and though they were wealthy, his dad was very abusive. There are a few accounts, of H.H. Holmes getting bullied. One account being he used to have a fear of doctors and medicine, which is ironic, and then he was bullied. I don't know the exact story off the top of my head, but he was bullied by being trapped in a medical facility at some point, or a medical room and there was like a cadaver dressed up like a doctor. And so H.H. Holmes said that was actually weirdly therapeutic for him, and it helped him get over his fear of medicine and doctors. So since he was bullied and he was really abused as a child, I can see that this is the making of a serial killer. Not that you can really blame what he did on his parents or his bullies, because it's just disgusting, but you know, it's definitely didn't help matters any. People who knew him when he was growing up said that he was odd and there was something off about him, something just wasn't right with him. He was unusually intelligent for a young boy, and as a kid he would do surgeries on animals. He would dissect them, and honestly he was probably killing them as well, and he wasn't telling people about it. He knew he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up after he got over his fear. At 16 years old, which is really young, but back then it was very common for this to happen, he got married for the first time and had a baby, and it was a little boy. In 1882, he registered in med school at University of Michigan. There he studied anatomy and chemistry. So as you can see, he was really fascinated by the body and the human form and what makes us as humans tick. And so H.H. Holmes wasn't only a serial killer, he was a scam artist as well. He would steal the cadavers from his med school's lab, and then he would take out a life insurance policy on these people that he just made up. He would disfigure their faces with acid or something and make sure that they weren't recognizable. And then he'd claim that these people were killed in an accident and get the money from the life insurance policy. So he graduated college in only 2 years, which is crazy. He graduated in 1884, and I think that just kind of shows how smart he was. I know times were different, but still, like, that's a lot. That's really crazy. There's still some nail polish on here. So that is, after he graduated, that is when he became a doctor and changed his name to H.H. Holmes. His first marriage ended shortly after that, and honestly, he was kind of crazy about the marriage thing. He married 3 different women and never divorced any of them. He was done with the marriage. He would just kind of move on and marry someone else. Crazy. So after leaving his wife and kid, he traveled across the country and went on a murder spree. He was murdering mostly women and children, and anytime he was questioned by the authorities or, well, anyone in general, he would deny everything, and then he would just disappear into the night. Back then, it was a lot easier to disappear. There wasn't as much organization, and the systems weren't as advanced and stuff as they are today. In August of 1886, he arrived in Chicago, and that is where most of our story takes place. While he was there, he came across a drugstore owned by Elizabeth S. Holton. He did as any serial killer would do. He presented himself as charming and a very hard worker. He was charismatic, and he got a job there, and he worked in the pharmacy. Shortly after he started working there, Elizabeth's husband mysteriously died. I'll let you decide what happened there. And after he died, H.H. Holmes offered to buy the drugstore from Elizabeth, and she agreed. Shortly thereafter, Elizabeth disappeared, never to be heard from again. When people would come in and ask about her, Holmes would say that she moved to California, that she just couldn't bear to live here without her husband. At his drugstore, he sold water that could cure any ailment. With that money that he made selling all of his bullshit, he purchased an empty lot across the street. And that is where the murder castle would be built. So I think that was 1888 that he purchased the lot, and the murder castle wasn't built I think that was 1888 that he purchased the lot, and the murder castle wasn't built until 1889. So 1888 is the year that Jack the Ripper was rampant in London. There's a theory out there that says H.H. Holmes is Jack the Ripper because there is not much, if any, documentation of him in the United States during that time, but there is, he had connections to London, and Jack the Ripper really disrespected women. He had he would just do terrible things to women, as H.H. Holmes would. His victims were primarily women. And H.H. Holmes had those connections in London. Over there, he tried to pull an insurance scheme, but the company found out about him, so there is documentation of him being there during that time period. Jack the Ripper also sent letters in to the police, and if you compare H.H. Holmes' handwriting with Jack the Ripper's handwriting, they're very similar, if not identical. So that's just a theory out there. I believe it's possible and crazy. Did H.H. Holmes go on one last kind of hurrah vacation in London to kill everybody, or to kill people before he went back to create his murder castle? I don't know. So, 1889, the building of the hotel starts. H.H. Holmes was very, very involved with the construction of the hotel. He actually made the blueprints for the hotel, and he contracted people to work on the hotel, but would never explain to them why something was the way it was if it made no sense. Like, there were corridors here, walls here. It didn't make any sense. He would always kind of stonewall them and never gaslight them, never explain anything to them. And he wouldn't keep people around for very long. If he felt that someone was sticking around for too long to oversee the construction, he would fire them or they would go missing. So little did these people know that they were building a place where so many people would die. Around that time, he only had one real person that he started to trust and allowed to grow close to him. That man was named Benjamin Pitezel. Benjamin knew exactly what was going on, and he would never say anything. He knew about the murders. He would actually do errands and help Holmes dispose of the bodies and all this sort of stuff. Like, this man was his little minion. So most of the rooms in the hotels were actually soundproof, and each room was built differently. Every room was a different killing chamber. There was a hanging chamber. There was a room that's made out of like cast iron, and there's torches on the walls. And all of these rooms had automatic like locks on them, so once you enter, they lock automatically behind you and there's no way out. The torches would turn on and burn you alive. There was a room that involved acid somehow. There was another room that was made out of completely bricks, top to bottom, and the only way in or out of that room was a trap door in the ceiling, so when you'd fall in, you wouldn't be able to get out. And he would leave people in there to starve to death for days. There was a vault that he had, and the vault was pretty small, and he would lock people in the vault and suffocate them. His favorite way for people to die was putting them in a gas chamber and listening to them scream. He was a sick son of a bitch. He liked people to suffer, and he liked their death to be slow and painful, and he was just sadistic. And I think this shows you just how truly evil he is. So the second floor of the hotel was where all the rooms were, and there was over 35 rooms. It was crazy. The hotel was built like a maze, so it was built to confuse and disorient people and make people uncomfortable. The colors of the wall were specifically painted to make you feel uncomfortable. In the basement, he had a crematorium and a chute that led up to all floors where he could just dump bodies in, and they would go down to the basement. He had a dissection table, torture devices, and just a whole bunch of other stuff. On the top floor, I believe, was his, like, where he lived and his office. Most of the people that he killed at the hotel were employees and women. So as you can already tell, this is a pretty awful story, but it gets worse. H.H. Holmes would take the bodies of his victims, and he would skin them, and he would remove their bones through all their muscle, and he would clean and bleach their bones, and then he would bolt their bones back together to create a skeleton. He would then sell those real skeletons to medical facilities and schools as those skeleton dummies that people learn anatomy on. Yeah. So over the years, like I said before, he had 3 wives, and none of them knew about each other. He also had multiple mistresses, and he was very charismatic. One mistress was named Julia Smith, and she actually worked at the hotel at the jewelry counter, I believe. And he had an affair with her and ended up getting her pregnant. And she agreed to let him give her an abortion if he would marry her. both Julia and the baby were never heard from again. I know that he had multiple other mistresses which he killed. There are just a lot of stories, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff we will never know about him. One day he went on a trip to Boston and he met a woman named Minnie Williams. Holmes had a lot of aliases, so he introduced himself to her as Henry Gordon, and they started dating and things were going well. She had no idea that he was a murderer or had all these wives or really who he was. Eventually she followed him back to Chicago because she wanted to be with him. She worked at the hotel with him. At some point and somehow, he convinced her to transfer a deed of one of her old properties in Fort Worth, Texas, to a man named Alexander Bond, which was actually just one of Holmes' aliases. After that, he proposed to her and convinced her to bring her sister Anne to town. He built up a pretty good friendship with Anne. They grew pretty close, and then one day he had her go up to his vault and get a file for him. He ended up locking her in the vault and suffocating her. During that time, Minnie also disappeared. Holmes was actually arrested in 1894 for selling mortgaged goods. Nope, not for murder. He was arrested for selling mortgaged goods. In jail, he met Marion Hedgepeth, who was in jail for robbing a train. Holmes concocted a plan to get $10,000 off of a fake life insurance policy for himself. He promised Marion Hedgepeth $500 if he would give him the name of a lawyer that he could trust. So Marion did, and the lawyer thought the idea was brilliant. He thought that they couldn't possibly get caught. Well, they did, and the insurance company ended up not giving them the money because they got suspicious. So instead, he convinced his friend Benjamin Pitezel to faking his death and getting a portion of the insurance money. It was to set him up as an inventor named B.F. Perry, and then have B.F. Perry die in a science lab. The plan was they were going to get a body that was the same measurements as Pitezel. And then they were going to disfigure it and make it unrecognizable. Back then, they didn't have fingerprint technology. My dog is trapped in the other room. Nikki. Oh, she's fine. So back then, they didn't have fingerprint technology, so how they would determine a body is the like dimensions of it, the size and the width and length and all that stuff. So instead, and Holmes had access to a lot of bodies. So instead of doing that, Holmes decided that he wanted to kill his best friend. So he actually killed him and disfigured his body horribly. He convinced Pitezel's wife that Pitezel was just in hiding, that it was just a cadaver, and that they would be reunited soon. So somehow he also convinced her to let him take the middle 3 of her 5 children, so she was left with the oldest and the baby, and he wanted to take them on an adventure through the United States and Canada. Holmes sent her on a trip that was close to his itinerary, so multiple times they were really close, and she was really close to her kids and didn't even know it. Holmes really liked to play games with people, so there were multiple times she was right by her children and she never knew it. Sadly, Holmes ended up killing all 3 children. In all of this confusion, he forgot to pay Marion Hedgepeth his $500. So Marion Hedgepeth was pretty pissed, and he told the police what was going on. In Boston, November of 1894, Holmes was arrested. Since they didn't have enough evidence to convict him, they arrested him for a horse theft in Texas. Then that's when things started to unravel. They started interviewing employees at the hotel, and they said they weren't allowed to clean the 2nd floor, so they had no idea what was going on up there. Up on the 3rd floor, they found a very large stove, and in that stove, there was hair from Minnie, a piece of gold chain that she owned, and her shoes. They looked inside his vault, and there were scratch marks on every single wall. In the basement, they found piles and piles of human remains and bones. They found piles of clothing, they found a dissection table, and they found torture devices. I won't even go into details. And so you have to know that this was especially horrific for this time period, because the only known serial killer prior to this was Jack the Ripper, and he was in London. So we were all in the States, you know, they were supposed to be okay, and little did they know how wrong they were. Holmes admitted to killing over 200 people at first, but only 9 of them were confirmed. Right, but a few days before his killing, he said he only killed 27. And then right before his killing, he said he only killed 2 people. So no one knows how many people he actually killed. We know it was a lot more than 2. Estimates range from 27 to over 200. So finally, on May 7th, 1896, he was hanged. But the rope didn't break his neck immediately, so he hung there for 15 minutes in pain until he eventually suffocated. And I think that right there, karma is a bitch, man. Like, if anyone on this planet deserved that, it was him. Like, he liked to watch people suffer, so that's what he got at the end. His last quote was something about him saying that he had the devil inside of him. And honestly, that seems true. It's better to think that than think any normal person would be able to kill that many people in that horrific of ways. Anyway, I didn't finish my nails this time either. They're a lot better than they were before, but I really got into that story. Anyway, I love you all. I will see you next week. Have a beautiful day. Mwah.